Dear friends and colleagues, a warm welcome from the European Movement office here in Brussels on a cold December evening. We are gathering for the 14th edition of Talking Europe, a joint initiative between the European Commission and the European Movement International to generate debate and discussion around some of the things that the EU is doing for citizens across our continent. And for this concluding final discussion for this year, right before Christmas, we have the pleasure of welcoming with us Pia Ahrenkilde Hansen, who is the Director General of DG Communications, the department of the European Commission responsible for communicating with people across our continent what the European Union is doing. Pia, thank you very much for joining us. I know it's a very busy week. Aside from everything else going on, we have the EU leaders decamping to Brussels to discuss some big issues and in some of the things that the EU has been dealing with all year long, and of course are going to dominate the agenda next year as well. So perhaps we can start with taking a broader look at some of the work that the European Commission has been doing and the priorities of DG Communications in talking about that work. What have been the main issues on your table these past few months?
Well, Petros, if I have to just look back a little bit, I think not exactly the same happened, but in terms of, let's say, changing completely what we thought we would be doing, again, a crisis struck, let's say, in our very close environment, namely when Russia invaded Ukraine in February, and that of course changed completely what we thought we would be doing, also in communication terms, because obviously the EU response, the policy response, and the Commission's work was very strongly affected by this. And in that sense, there is a parallel to 2 years ago, or now more than 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when COVID struck and basically again shifted the priorities, both, or some of them at least, many of them, when it comes to the policy work and therefore also the communication work. So I would say this is really what has shaped very, very largely what our communication has been about, because we have been accompanying, and this is our role, this is the role of communication, accompanying the policy response, accompanying everything that President von der Leyen and her college of commissioners have decided in terms of leading the Commission's response and proposing answers in the role that is our institution's role, in the role that is the EU's role, to support Ukraine, to act in solidarity with Ukraine, at the same time as alleviating the impact that Russia's war against Ukraine has created on Europeans and on European business, of course. I mean, we're very busily continuing a very, very intense response when it comes to the side of energy, which of course has been very much affected by what has happened in Ukraine. And all of that, so two sides of that coin, basically acting in solidarity with Ukraine and alleviating the impact for Europe, and of course preparing the future. And for the communication, this has been, I would say, the priority. Of course, always looking extremely closely, because this is our compass, to people's concerns on the ground, because that's whom our policies are designed for, our citizens, our businesses, our stakeholders, Europe as such, in addition to all the help that we're providing to Ukraine, and in addition to everything that we're doing in the wider world, of course, including also looking at impacts of Russia's war globally.
Indeed, and considering exactly that negative impact that any conflict has, especially a conflict taking place on the European continent, Public opinion has remained very much on side, supportive, both of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, millions of which have found refuge in EU countries, but also of the efforts that the European Union in general and the Commission in particular have been making to deal with the refugee crisis, to deal with the energy fallout and all the other byproducts of the conflict. And I think the fact that we see citizens remaining on side and supportive of those initiatives perhaps is testament to the quality of the work that you and others have been doing to communicate exactly why it is important to stand up to Russia, why it is important to support Ukraine. So what do you think have been the successes, but also the challenges in that effort to communicate with citizens and explain why the EU has taken the stance that it has taken?
Well, thank you very much for the positive words. Indeed, I mean, I think that we have. Well, first of all, we are fortunate to have a political leadership and indeed a president who is both very, very, let's say, determined to act on the major challenges facing Europe. We saw it during COVID, and we are seeing it here in response to the war in Ukraine and the efforts to indeed support as long as it takes and as much as it takes Ukraine. I think that has been extremely decisive in preserving what you referred to and building, because it has to be built every day, right? I mean, trust is something that you can build and build and build, but you can lose it very, very fast if you don't act and in a way that is perceived as meaningful and making a difference. And I think that citizens saw that Europe acted and made a difference in the COVID crisis. It took time. It was not a given. You asked about the challenges in the beginning of that crisis. If we go back there, because I think that what we're doing right now is actually also because we learned a lot from the COVID crisis. But in the beginning of the COVID crisis, of course, people were, in their lives and livelihoods threatened. And it took for Europe as a whole time to unite around an approach that led to indeed this successful vaccine and vaccination strategy of the European Union that very much also President von der Leyen was driving, but it didn't come overnight. And in the beginning, people kind of fell back to look to national solutions, and it took a while since in trust terms we could build up again this, let's say, confidence of Europeans that Europe would provide, let's say, the answer or the solutions. But I think that is exactly what they saw, and this is exactly what was done. And on that capital of trust, if you like, which is precious and which can never be taken for granted, I think that we were stronger when then the war hit Ukraine, and we also much faster as a European Union united and responded, and there I'm really happy that the Commission had such a resolute and fast response also, and that's of course the political level responsible for that, and there the communication is there to support and back that, and also at political level the communication has been very forceful. So I think all of that has helped. There's never, as I said, one single factor that explains why you have a certain level of support for the action. But we do see indeed, you're right, Petros, that the support, despite the fact that the crisis, of course, induced by Russia's war is biting. There's inflation, there are high energy prices, but people actually already early on in our surveys indicated that they were ready to take, let's say, a blow on that count if it were to defend, let's say, our values. And we see, and now we of course also see evolutions, but we see that support, for example, for hosting Ukrainians, for supporting in all kinds of ways the humanitarian aid, the civil protection aid, but also the sanctions, the military aid even is quite strong, even if of course it varies because geopolitically, of course, the situation is different at the front line from countries inside the European Union who are further away from the front line, and there are historical there are energy supply situations which are specific, and a lot of other factors that determine how the support is in each member state. But overall, it has remained strong, and of course, no complacency. We will have to keep acting on those two fronts as we are doing: solidarity with Ukraine, alleviating the effects of the crisis, to maintain that trust, to maintain that support.
Yeah. Over the past few years, we have been conducting our own polling, and I know the Commission has a lot of data on that too. And it's interesting to see that even though we are now 15 years into a series of crises, starting from the financial crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, the mass population movements that put pressure on the borders of the EU, the UK's decision to leave the EU, and then, of course, the pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine. All these crises have one thing in common. They demonstrate that we can only deal with them and provide answers and solutions if we work together. Is that something that you have picked up? Is there something that you see in the Commission's communication work? There is an appreciation from citizens across our continent that indeed we have a better chance to achieve a more successful future for ourselves if we work together. Do you pick that up too? Because it's something that has come through our polling, certainly.
I pick it up in the figures that I just referred to, because I think that they are resulting from indeed also communication at all levels, which is perhaps clearer than it has been before in terms of what is needed. And I see it every day also in terms of communication in the capitals, communication by governments. And of course, this shared responsibility for communicating about what the European Union does is decisive for indeed how it resonates with people across Europe. Again, there are lots of differences, and therefore there also has to be very tailor-made communication on the ground. And this is what we achieve, for example, our level by having Commission representations on the ground, by the way, working very closely with the European Parliament liaison offices, and so mostly they are located also in the same building. Small teams, but that make a big difference in precisely both having, their ear to the ground, knowing what's going on, knowing through which prism the EU policies and initiatives are being read, and being able to therefore also inform those very same policy responses in a way that means that you can actually calibrate them better, because you have, in addition to all the other sources of, let's say, policy intelligence that our different policymakers have in our different services, help precisely design the responses in ways that are listening to the concrete concerns in each member state, which are different. But this more unified approach that we have seen very strongly at play in the response, and the rapidity of the response that we have reacted with when it comes to the war in Ukraine. I mean, we are at the 9th sanctions package at the moment, right? That's just one angle of it, but a very important one when it comes to what is in our power as the European Union to basically tell Russia in very clear and concrete terms that has an impact on Russia's abilities economically and beyond, that we simply have no, let's say, understanding, or indeed cannot accept this war against Ukraine, against a sovereign nation, and that the only solution to this is that Russia really basically withdraws. That is the way to have peace. But until then, we have a strong and united response and very strong unity by the member states around those responses, such as the sanctions package, but of course, way beyond in all the other policy measures, because there's also a lot of financial aid flowing to Ukraine. There are solidarity lanes enabling Ukraine to export, but also to receive essential goods. All of that we are trying to communicate so that our citizens are really seeing the full picture as it unfolds in terms of the European response. And there, I think member states have also been communicating much more forcefully about the EU response as such.
Indeed. And alongside Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have also been seeing a type of disinformation warfare that the Kremlin has been waging, attacking directly our democracy and our public spaces with propaganda and other forms of disinformation, which is in itself, a form of warfare indeed. How have the European Commission been dealing with that kind of warfare? How have you been tackling the disinformation and pro-Kremlin propaganda that we see both on social media, but also in more traditional media across Europe? And what are the lessons perhaps you have drawn from those efforts?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think one lesson is that occupying the ground with a strong response, so as the European Union has been doing and communicating assertively and forcefully about it, has been part of that response. Of course, that is by no means enough, because we all know the Russian propaganda machine is extremely powerful and extremely well, let's say, developed. We have, in the context of the war, of course, and it has been part of the sanctions, banned the activities of propaganda outlets, and this, I think, has been something very, very forceful, in addition to continuing, and there we have the External Action Service excellent tools to expose the Russian disinformation, which has helped us, and by the way, long before the war started, and which has been used widely, both outside and inside the European Union, to debunk the Russian disinformation. That is continuing with force to be a very powerful instrument that we have at our disposal as communicators. But the response is, of course, far beyond communication as such, and also is to do about education, resilience building, working together with independent media and other partners, indeed addressing very specifically also on the ground, and once again through our representations, this very societal problem that Russian disinformation is, because it really makes its way and through social media and in many other ways to all kinds of levels of society. So therefore, it really requires a lot of analysis, but it also requires a lot of presence on our own part to make it more difficult for the disinformation to be credible for our citizens, because of course the more they know, the more they are engaged on Europe's response, the more difficult it becomes for the Russia's disinformation narratives to take root. So we also work very much to inform our communicators about those narratives and how best to respond in each case, because sometimes it's better not to respond. Sometimes it's very important to follow those who perpetrate the narratives and make it more difficult for them to continue to do so. Of course, we are democratic, we are Europe, So there are methods that Russia uses that we could never use. And transparency, by the way, is perhaps one of our strongest weapons. But we have to act on many fronts to fight disinformation, in addition to the regulatory work, of course, which has been greatly strengthened also because we can engage in a different way with actors such as big platforms that have a huge power, let's say, to also combat information and combat disinformation on their side. And we have much better regulatory instruments in our toolbox, let's say, than before we had the Digital Single Market Act. And we have also very good cooperation with the key actors in this domain. And I'm confident that we will continue to build our toolbox, where we already have the Democracy Action Plan, we have a disinformation code, and now, as President von der Leyen has announced, we also are going to have a Defense of Democracy package, which will also, I'm sure, have an impact on the possibility of doing or acting, let's say, on disinformation. So lots of things in our toolbox.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a battle we all have to take on at the local, regional, national, and European level, the institutions, but also civil society, because the more trusted messengers you employ, the more your message will cut through the negative narratives that you mentioned, because obviously people often trust those closest to them. So the more we inform and empower our citizens to become our ambassadors and our communicators, the farther away that message is going to carry. And I think that's also something that we appreciate very much, the collaboration we have both with the Commission here, but also the permanent representations, the representations of the Commission in member states, that we can have that relationship. Maybe we should leave the crisis aside for a second and also look into the future. You know, the European Union concluded earlier this year a process entitled the Conference of the Future of Europe, a quite innovative, revolutionary in many ways process of engaging political stakeholders with civil society, social partners, and putting at the core citizens themselves, randomly selected citizens from across Europe, which came together and crafted proposals for the direction that our union should take. Now, in your experience, how did you view that process, and how did you communicate that new form of engagement that the EU has undertaken? And that is groundbreaking in many ways to see at the supranational, the European level, deliberative democracy complementing representative democracy.
Indeed, groundbreaking, an unprecedented initiative, and of course also a big challenge. Let's not forget the context in which the conference took place. You're telling me, please get out of the crisis, but actually it happened in the middle of the COVID crisis, because we have been in a kind of permanent crisis response mode. And despite that, the conference, as the innovative process that it was in democratic terms, innovating and complementing representative democracy, actually succeeded in, and I think beyond expectations, because there was a lot of skepticism, as you know, and you were an active participant as well, actually succeeded very much thanks to the engagement of all the citizens who took part, both the 800 citizens that formed the different European citizens panels that deliberated, because this was about deliberative democracy at a European scale, an unprecedented European scale, and all the thousands and thousands of citizens who took part in events organized on the ground that fed into the process jointly with the digital platform that also was part of the process. Communication was definitely a challenge in that environment, and also because it did not, of course, yield, let's say, headline news at every deliberation. It was very much about a process and what happened and transformed people, empowered them throughout the process to come up with very concrete, very meaningful proposals as they did, and the evidence of that are in the final report that was handed over to the presidents of the institutions on the 9th of May. So I think, and in communication terms, it was definitely a challenge that, let's say, stayed too confidential, undoubtedly, and that could have been more forcefully communicated also on the ground than was the case. Nevertheless, I think the results are there. The lessons on communication are also there, and we had some very good communication, again, thanks to the citizens who provided extremely interesting testimonials, in addition to also the political moments around the conference, which gave rise to, let's say, some surges of interest, if you like, in the process. And I think that this is something we need to build on. One of the other challenges in communications terms from the conference was that the themes were very broad, and it's always a bit more difficult to communicate on a broad theme, as important as it is in terms of priorities and so forth, than when it comes to a concrete policy issue where you can more easily focus on specific aspects and indeed, let's say, zoom in on a specific recommendation. This we will now have the chance to do, because already on after this feedback event, which was also a very original feature of this process that made it, let's say, I think, very credible also in the eyes of the citizens who formed the heart of this conference. I think they were very happy. You were also there, like I was at the feedback event, to witness that, even if, of course, the citizens were also asking for more detail. They were expecting more replies than were possible in a single day. But I think they got a pretty good idea of how important a change they had participated in, and which will now continue, because the pioneering effort is not over, far from it. I mean, it led already to concrete commitments by the Commission on our part, and of course the other institutions as well. But let me speak for the Commission, that on the 17th of June, we already charted what should be the way ahead, embedding, if you like, this method of policy making as a complement to the other methods we already have in place, because we have a very wide-ranging consultation process already in place. But complementing that on key proposals, such as the one that is going to see the light of day soon regarding food waste. Well, on Friday, a new citizens will have to deliberate and will be invited, and they will come to Brussels, and the Commission will welcome them to help us shape forthcoming legislation on food waste, and indeed embed, let's say, on certain key measures, this new way of working with citizens on policy making. So I think that's a great result. It's not all, because we have also said in the summer, as follow-up to the conference, that we would enhance the platform that we already have, the Have Your Say platform, which is precisely a platform where citizens and stakeholders can feed into policy. But we now want to make that a kind of one-stop shop for citizens' engagement, where there will also be interactive elements in addition to the elements that already exist. So, and also beyond the citizens' panels, and there will be more of them. There will be another one on the metaverse. That's also a very concrete topic, which interests many citizens. There will be one on learning mobility, very important also in the European Year of Skills that is ahead of us. And there will be indeed also, let's say that's the plan at least, really a framework for both our services, but also for people on the ground to connect to this new wave of citizens engagement that we have launched, which is a follow-up to the conference. So a lot will be happening there, and I think seeing the citizens transformed, also skeptical citizens who came in, because there were citizens from all walks of life. That was the whole point. It was representative panels in that sense, that they really should reflect the diversity of the European Union and our views on what the European Union does. And I think that very largely was the case. Of course, people come if they want to participate. I mean, we're never going to force anybody to participate in a panel. So ultimately, it's the citizens themselves who choose. But there were certainly people who came with an expectation which was not very positive towards the European Union, who at the outset directly also to me and perhaps to you as well, if you met and discussed with some of the citizens, were saying, I didn't expect this. I was really surprised. I learned a lot, and I want to continue to take part. So you also see in that kind of process what happens when you're engaged, when you're informed, and can have your say.
Indeed. I mean, one thing that we have noticed over the past few years, again, with our work with citizens, is that sense of disempowerment a lot of them feel, that their voice doesn't count. And exercises like the conference can go a long way to address and alleviate even that feeling. Because what we picked up from our work with the citizens, and we worked with them quite a lot, was that feeling that, whether they were pro, against, they were all curious about what the EU is and what is this process supposed to deliver. And at the end of it, they all came out and said that, we feel now a sense of ownership. We feel more European as a result, because we had the opportunity to contribute in the making of Europe. And perhaps I can also pick up from one of the questions from our audience. Adrian is saying, what can we do to increase that feeling of being European? And I suppose that exercises like the conference, generally participatory democracy, can go some way to help us do that. Just to respond to Adrian's question, how can we win the hearts and the minds of Europeans? How can we make them feel a bit more European?
It's a very, very good question, and it's very important. And one of the requirements is that we burst the bubble. We sit here and we talk with each other, and it's extremely interesting, of course. But as we also heard from one of our vice presidents at the feedback event, it has to happen on the ground also, and it can happen on the ground in many ways. I mean, I think we there again, as DG Communication, we're not working on one component only, even if the citizens engagement angle is extremely important. I think it's also very important, that I'll come back to the engagement angle in a minute, but I also want to mention that, because it has filled a lot of our work as well during this year, linking, let's say, what Europe stands for with what Europe is doing, for example, on the energy transition, because we're doing punctual things to alleviate the impact of Russia's war on industry and on citizens. But we're also looking to the longer term in line with the transformational agenda that indeed this commission started out with, green and digital. And of course, it's very much based on our values, and we see now our values being challenged by autocracies, and Europe responding by standing up and defending them. And there's a link between that and between the policy making that we are doing. And this year we have tried, also through some innovative information campaigns directed towards citizens, to bring that message across. It was called, in the one I'm referring to was called You Are EU as a campaign, and precisely established that link between our values and the issues that a lot of Europeans believe are important, the green energy transition, climate change, etc. So that's one way of getting across, and we have really invested there because we thought it was important to reach a majority of European families. Now, coming back to the citizens engagement part, that one is definitely decisive and needs to happen out there on the ground in all corners of Europe, and not just when the institutions organize a conference, as we did indeed, and it was a big exercise in challenging conditions, but successfully accomplished. But these kinds of debates and engagement exercises also need to continue and be promoted locally. And for that, it's also very important that not only that we have, of course, representations in the capitals, and in a couple of member states, we also have them in regions, but we are also building, and this was an initiative that was originally very much driven also by the European Parliament, together with the Committee of the Regions, and we are partners, all three of us, in this Building Europe with Local Authorities project, where there is this possibility by enabling with the information that these local councillors see are useful to them, to use these things as bases to basically conduct these kinds of course, smaller scale debates and exercises in all corners of Europe, based on not what we perhaps feel just today are important, but also what people out there really think are important, and where they experience concretely the impact of the European Union, or where they have questions about what the European Union does. So there's that effort. There's the effort of pedagogy. I think you will agree with me, Petros, that in the conference on the future of Europe, it also came to light, and for me as a communicator, that's very important, that we need to keep explaining what the European Union does, how it works, even if, of course, I'm always a bit reluctant, to get too focused on processes, because what matters in the end is the delivery. What difference does it make to my life? But I think the conference has shown that there is still, even among citizens who actually do engage, there's a need to understand better, how it all works between the national institutions and the European institutions, and make it as concrete, of course, and tangible as possible. So we have some pedagogy to do, both on how Europe works and what it delivers. And there, everybody on the ground, civil society, local representatives, they have a great role to play.
And I think it is still important, and perhaps echoing another question from one of our viewers, Wow, who says that we often talk about the challenges and the crisis, and then we don't have enough time to talk about the successes of the European Union, how the EU helps member states and citizens deal with the challenges of their time. And I think you have already answered that question exactly because of all the work that needs to go into explaining and always communicating and engaging at all possible levels.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a little bit of time.
If I can just say one other thing, because it's also been important, even if we're in a bit of a phase where we must deal with the short-term needs. We have successfully created a plan that will steer Europe through the winter in terms of having the energy supplies that we need. And as President von der Leyen said in recent days, now we're already looking to securing the winter of 2023, right? Because we really need to be prepared, and through all these different strands of our energy transition and acceleration that we have been driving here recently to free ourselves from any dependencies of Russia in energy terms. We definitely also need to look to the longer term, and we need to also prepare that in communication terms. And we have also with other campaigns on the Next Generation EU, you will remember that came in the wake of COVID, this enormous plan to basically enable Europe to steer through the economic crisis and indeed harness, let's say, the green and digital transition and build our resilience. Well, there we will also have, I think, through that plan, and therefore also through communicating that plan as it comes to fruition in terms of concrete projects in member states as we go forward, we will have opportunities to show what Europe delivers. That delivery will be extremely important, in addition to indeed helping Europe steer through the crisis and providing solutions, including through renewables and other very concrete measures that we are supporting and accelerating, and all the investment that needs to go with it also, so that, you know, Europe, both from an industrial and citizens' point of view, remains strong.
Yeah. As we have approaching the end of our conversation, perhaps we can look a year and a half ahead. We have the European elections approaching in 2024. In 2019, we saw a concerted and successful effort by the European Parliament, the European Commission, but also the civil society to increase the turnout. We saw higher numbers of citizens actually stepping forward and casting their ballot. What can we do to build on those successes? How is the European Commission, together with the European Parliament, working to make sure that more of our citizens take part? And perhaps use the conference on the future of Europe as a bridge towards those European elections, not least considering that anti-European, undemocratic forces are gaining ground across our continent at the national level and perhaps even at the European level. So what do we need to do between now and the European elections to make sure that more people come forward to vote, but more importantly, they vote for pro-European, pro-democratic political parties?
Well, I think we all have a collective responsibility to keep, let's say, everything that the EU is doing very visible and understandable to our citizens, and as you rightly say, also engage as much as possible on those topics. This is not something that is done by one politician, one institution. It is indeed something that needs to be done in common by all the, let's say, actors and stakeholders in the European Union. And we are many. So we have a lot of, let's say, communication artillery that we can collectively deploy. But of course, we need people to be able to receive the messages and also to engage on the topics in a language and also in a form that is suitable for them. That was, by the way, also one of the messages from the conference. We want to have a different kind of information. We want to know more what is happening day to day. We want to know it in a way that is close to where we are, where we live, where we go in terms of our media. So all of that is also something where we really have to think hard. How can we do a better job? And we are constantly trying to innovate. I mean, I think, or I hope, even if few people have had time to watch, and I'm not thinking about the World Cup, but I'm thinking about the Champions League matches. But actually, quite a lot of citizens have watched these matches, and in between those matches, they have seen, many of them at least, they have seen some TV spots that we have aired and that we will continue to air in the new season to show what each and every one of us can do to save energy. And making it a bit more tangible, what the European Green Deal means for people, you know, at this time, because of course it means many things. It also means many, let's say, bright opportunities for the future. So those we also need to show in a concrete way. I mentioned Next Generation EU and the projects that will come on stream between now and 2026, because that's where we have the next generation planning. So basically, there are lots of ways in which we can all use all these opportunities, use all these assets that we have to show citizens that it delivers, and engage in debates about it. I just mentioned this new project with local councillors as an example. There are many others. So debating it out there, being very, very resolute about fighting disinformation, because I really think we need to step it up on that one, and continuing to show that both in terms of our values, our democracy, and in terms of what Europe delivers, to help people face up to the challenges, be it on inflation, be it on energy, be it on transitioning to the Green Deal without leaving anybody behind. I think that we have a lot of opportunities to show how fortunate we are to be together in the European Union. So I would say keep calm and communicate. I mean, that's of course not enough. As I said, communication is there to accompany and support a strong and united EU policy response, as we are seeing currently, and we will continue to do our best to do so as we go into the new year. But I think a lot has been accomplished. Also, a lot of questions and challenges need to be addressed, and we are as ready as we ever were to do so in 2023.
I think that's a good way, perhaps, to conclude our discussion. There's never enough time, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to host you again in a future edition of Talking Europe. But in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for taking your time and giving us your answers with clarity and precision as ever. And we look forward to supporting you in your work. The European movement is a willing and able partner always for the Commission, and we look forward to continuing our collaboration.
Thank you to you, Petros, and to all your colleagues and all your organizations across Europe and beyond. We're really grateful for everything you're doing. Thank you very much.
A pleasure, pleasure. And to you, dear friends, thank you very much for joining us. Stay tuned on the European Movement social media, but also keep an eye on our website for future events and discussion like this. You can always write to us and get involved with our work. Until then, and considering this is our final event for the year, we wish you happy holidays and a happy new year. See you again in January. Take care.